titled Preparing Students for the Unknown. In today's day and age when, so many jobs that we knew existed before no longer exist, and we know lots of new types of jobs are coming up, this is a very, very relevant topic, and we are very, very fortunate to have some very well-informed speakers with us today. But before I introduce the speakers, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Anju Singh. I'm part of the University Relations team, and I will be the host and the moderator for the webinar today. I also wanted to cover a few housekeeping items before we introduce the speakers. This is a webinar series by University of Calgary scholars. Information presented is a summary of the scholars' research. In this case, both of our scholars here have a lot of experience and knowledge of teaching and learning, and that's what they'll be sharing with us today. Please submit questions throughout the duration of the webinar. We have a window available for you to submit your questions, and we'll be looking at the questions as they come in and asking questions as appropriate. Please also check the resources provided. We have links to a couple of resources for you. And give us your feedback throughout the webinar through a survey. So the survey is available for you throughout the webinar. It takes very little time. Just give us your feedback because it's really important for us as we plan the rest of our webinar series and program. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Jay Cross. He is Director of the College of Discovery, Creativity, and Innovation in the Taylor Institute of Teaching and Learning. Jay is also a professor in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and the Cummings School of Medicine. And he's an innovator of sorts, has a head packed with lots of great stuff related to teaching and learning. We also have Leslie Reid. She's a Vice-Provost of Teaching and Learning. She's also a teaching professor with the Faculty of Science and 3M National Teaching Fellow. Before we get Leslie started, we do have a quick poll for our audiences. This is just for us to gauge who's in the audience so our speakers can talk to, what will interest our audiences. So please take a minute and let us know, are you a post-secondary educator, a K-12 educator, a parent, a student, or just interested in the topic? So while our audiences are answering, Leslie, can you give us a quick summary of what you're going to cover?
Thanks, Anju. Yeah, I mean, this is such an exciting topic, I think, that lots of folks in post-secondary are thinking about. And I'm going to set the stage for what some of the current and emerging workplace needs are that we're hearing about, from employers, that we're hearing about from our students, and really set the stage for how that's informing and influencing not only what we're preparing our students for, but how we're preparing our students when they're here on our campus, doing their degrees.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So let's take a look at the responses. So we have mostly 43% are post-secondary educators. We have some K-12 educators. We also have some parents, online students, and some people who are just interested in the topic. So a bit of everything, which is great. So with that, we'll get lessons started.
All right, thank you. So I guess to refer back to this how and what are we doing to prepare our students? And the topic of this webinar is for the unknown. I mean, there's some things we know about the unknown, and so how are we, what are we doing here in higher education to respond to that? And I thought I'd go back a bit in time, and this image in front of you represents, maybe the scene of what it would look like to be in higher education 100 years ago. And it's changed. I mean, if you look at that picture now, we've got someone standing at the front. There's a barrier between the expert at the front and the students in the back. It looks like they're watching a demonstration of some sort. And I mean, those things still happen today in higher education. There's a time and a place for that. But what we're really moving toward is we know that students need to be deeply engaged with what they're learning and find meaning in what they're learning. And so both the physical and metaphorical barriers between the teachers on one side of the wall and the students on the other are being broken down. And we're thinking of students more as partners and community outside, largely as partners that helps us inform what we're doing. And so that's the how we're doing things differently. We're involving students more. We're designing curriculum that are meaningful to students and employers and community. But what we're doing, what we're actually teaching is changing too to respond to those needs. And that's what I'm going to talk about as we move forward. You know, one of the things that we need to respond to, not only in post-secondary, but also it's a response to what's happening in the workplace as well, is demographics are changing. Diversity is increasing. We see that on campus here. We see a changing student demographic and therefore changing needs of our students. We see students of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all genders. And so we need to be thinking about that. And that's also a change that's happening in the workplace. Diversity is increasing. It's an all-important topic of late to be able to benefit from having diverse workplaces and diverse learning spaces. There's some skills and some things we need to talk about that happen in post-secondary. The other thing that's changing, and I think this has been a conversation that's happened for a couple of decades, but lately I feel like conversation keeps coming to the forefront about the skills that we want students leaving post-secondary with are not just the technical skills from whatever disciplines they are studying. There is also a wealth of skills we want students to have, like social skills. So they can get deeply engaged in collaboration and group work in these diverse teams that they'll be working in when they enter the workforce. You know, another conversation that you see more and more of that's happened over the last year or two, and I love the title of this article that came out in the New York Times about a month ago, you know, will robots take our children's job, is that, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, robots, machine learning, all of these things are starting to automate some of the things that humans used to do. And as it turns out, robots are better at some things than humans are. And so it's responding as well, you know, helping our students respond to, there may be things that people do right now in the workplace that they don't do, you know, in the future. And a great example of that is the driverless cars and drones. You know, will we need pilots in the same way that we have airline pilots today? So that's something that's changing that we need to respond to. You know, the other thing that's changing as well is I guess the relationship between the bricks and mortar higher education institutions and partner institutions who are responding to some of the needs that students and employers are talking about. And here's a few examples as well. So the Education Design Lab, you know, they describe themselves as a pipeline between schools and work. And so what they do is create design challenges and partner with higher education institutions to work with their students to solve real-world 21st century problems and challenges. IDEO is another example of a relationship between a school, IDEO, that offers courses in design thinking, and Stanford University. MOOCs are something that have been around for a while, the massive open online courses. And I think what MOOCs have really done to shake up the higher education landscape is they've made knowledge accessible to all. Anyone can sign up for a MOOC and take a course on intro physics or computer programming or design thinking, for example. And Mission University is one of the most interesting things that have landed on my desk about things that are changing. You know, the concept of Mission U is that you get educated first and you pay back later once you're employed in your first job. And so, that's really also responding to a need where students want to be work ready, career ready, and also be understanding what does work ready and career ready mean. So yeah, these are some of the things that post-secondary needs to respond to. We are responding to that here at the University of Calgary, and I think that's beautifully reflected in our Eyes High strategy. And you can see in this image here, we talk about the importance of research and scholarship, but we are also, really focusing on the quality and the breadth of learning. And that learning refers back to, ensuring our students have the skills and knowledge to prepare them to be experts in their discipline. It also means starting to help our students prepare with the social skills, the collaboration readiness, the quality of their thinking readiness, and so that fits into how we're responding within that pillar of breadth of learning. And
sorry, Leslie, and the Eyes High strategic plan, just to clarify for our audiences, is our strategic plan for the University of Calgary that takes us all the way to 2022.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that context. Exactly. And so, this strategy really helps folks like me and folks like Jay figure out, what needs to be happening in our campus community so our students and our colleagues are ready and prepared. Returning to community is important, and then you can see woven through our strategy is the student experience in our campus culture. And so, we're focusing in here today on talking about the student experience. So just to go back, I want to return back to this idea that of the growing importance of social skills in our students and collaboration skills. One of the best books I read that came out in 2017 that really helped inform my thinking is this book, Humility is the New Smart. And what the authors, Hess and Ludwig, propose is that there's an old smart that has kind of permeated how we have taught students in higher education, and that's the students that know the most and make the fewest mistakes on tests are our smartest and best students. And while that's important, what they challenged us to think about is New Smart, which is it's as important the quality of our thinking, how we think, how we understand how we think and learn, and how we relate to others is imperative for moving into the 21st century. They describe these 4 new smart behaviors as being able to quiet our ego. And I think about that as being able to put ideas on the table and then let ideas go, when we're working in a group, when we're working in a team, when we're trying to design and think about the best ideas, we need to quiet our own egos, our own ideas, and be working in collaboration with others. Managing our thinking and emotions is really about, do we understand how our human brains are biased? And how do we ensure that our thinking, how do we check our thinking from time to time to make sure it is open and thoughtful and as unbiased as possible? And how do we manage our emotions that creep into, interacting with others, both here when students are in school and when they enter the workplace? Reflective listening, so that seeking to understand when we're working in teams and groups, trying to understand the needs of others. That is really a skill that needs to be honed over time. How do we listen to others with that intent to really understand where someone is coming from? And relating to others. The ability to empathize, to understand where someone else is coming from, whether that's someone we're working in partnership with in the workplace or someone we're designing something for, a client maybe, when we're in the workplace. Are these 4 really important skills that are honed over time with feedback and the same way we would hone any other skill in a discipline we are learning.
This is really interesting because it's a strategic shift from preparing students to know everything and go in there and be heroes and, solve all the problems to actually learning and listening and synthesizing and thoughtfully then finding the solution. Right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Absolutely. And it's not easy. I think of, when I read this book, I thought, well, how do I do this myself. And I really became intentional over the last year about, how does one do this effectively? How do you check in with yourself and see how you're doing? And so, it's been a great thought exercise for me as well. It's not just for our students. Yeah. The other piece that is really, I think, important, it's an important framework to have in mind, and it's important that we teach our students about growth mindset as they enter the workplace as a lifelong way in which they see how they are learners in the world. And, growth mindset, the work came out of Stanford by Carol Dweck. It's tremendous work that she has done on understanding that we learn best when we have this growth mindset. And what that is the belief that intelligence, talent, skill is developed over time through intentional practice. It's not that we are born with a fixed set of skills and intelligence. It's that we have the ability to grow. But having that growth mindset about our skills and abilities is very important because as it turns out, if we have what's called a fixed mindset, it actually gets in the way of learning. Folks with growth mindsets believe that effort is the pathway to learning something. Effort is the pathway to mastery. And so effort is needed to learn something new, and that mistakes are essential. So that trial and error, that learning, that trying something, getting feedback from peers, getting feedback from experts is imperative to learning something new. And that, in line with that is failure is an opportunity to learn. It's not something to be avoided, but it is something to be embraced from a learning perspective. And that feedback is all part of essential to learning. So growth mindset and these humility skills, I think, are something really provocative for us to think about how we embed that in the curriculum. How do we teach it? How do we assess it? How do we move forward? So really, students are leaving post-secondary. They are entering the workplace with this mindset of their learning never ends. It's a constant, iterative cycle that prepares them for the unknown. Therefore, the unknown is actually exciting and something to be embraced.
So you talked about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset.
Yes.
So are we saying that we can get anyone to adopt a growth mindset that no matter what you're born with, you can always be in the growth mindset phase? Or are there people that have a growth mindset and those that don't, and those that don't will never develop one?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, the idea is that, both having a growth mindset is something that we should learn. And, there are certain experiences that can lead a student over time, as they go through school, as they go through life, to not even know they have a growth mindset, but they do. And then there's other experiences that we can have in early childhood and beyond that lead us to believe that intelligence is fixed. And that's a really challenging question because it's how we believe about what we learn is informed by, what happens at home, how we experience social media, what happens at school. All the messages we get throughout life can lead to whether we tend toward fixed or growth mindset. And then as it turns out, we can have fixed mindsets about certain things. Like, for example, you'll hear someone say, oh, I'm just not a math person. I'm not good at that. So they may hold a fixed mindset about their ability to do mathematics, but they may not hold a fixed mindset in other things. And so just even being aware that you can have those mindsets and that they get in the way of your learning is something that's important that we talk about when students are in school.
And there's an audience question in here about new technologies and how they are more disruptive rather than, and not in a good way,
right?
Rather than helpful. So even when you look at students on campus, there's the amount of attention that gets paid to the technology in their hands versus attention to what is being discussed in the classroom or taught in the classroom. So is there a viewpoint that you'd like to express related to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe if I were to add to the list, the humility is the new smart list, I might add my own 21st century skill is being able to manage being able to manage ourselves around all of our devices, our technology devices. And I think, you know, that's a skill I feel like I'm honing now. When do I put my phone away? When do I put it in do not disturb mode? You know, it is a skill in and of itself. You know, when should I be ready, willing, and able to receive all information coming my way, and when do I turn it off, when do I need to focus? And so I think that's a skill that we need to be talking about more with our students and ourselves. You know, I sometimes ask, how am I modeling that behavior for students? Yeah.
And then in the case of the question related to the growth mindset, probably people can go and read some of the writings of the scholar that you mentioned.
Yes, yeah. Carol Dweck from Stanford has written some great books. In fact, she wrote a book that came out in 2007 for a general audience on growth mindset called Mindset. That really, you know, lays the concepts out beautifully.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, then we will transition over to Jay and what Jay has to share with us.
Great. Thank you very much, Leslie, for setting this stage. And I feel kind of privileged working in a university in an environment where we get to think about how quickly things have changed by technology, by other things shaping the educational landscape, and it's our challenge then to take this up and to be part of the future. So I will just jump into my slides and give you a bit of my own context and own experience in that, building on, and I'll be touching on many things that Leslie talked about. One of the interesting things that I've lived through is that transition in my lifetime, going from being an educated person that's described by being proficient in the 3 R's. And as Leslie mentioned, that was assessed in forms of assessment on tests. If you got the fewest wrong, you were the most educated. And now, as we transition in talking about those 21st century skills, people talk about the 4 C's instead of the 3 R's. And those 4 C's, and there's lots and lots on the web and the academic literature written about this if people want to pursue it. But the 4 C's being the critical thinker, the communicator, the collaborator, and the creator. The notion of and anybody can be a creator, whether it's in a social context, an engineering context, an artistic context, in terms of creating something that's meaningful to bring a community together. Often when you hear this, though, you'll have people say, well, that's fine, these 4 C's are exciting, but still surely we need to educate people that are educated in terms of what the 4 R's. And that becomes the challenge from a program design, even from an individual course design, is how do we have those foundational literacies coexisting with these 4 C competencies and even some of those personal attributes, character qualities that Leslie talked about as very fundamental. And this is a really nice graphic. World Economic Forum is one organization among many working in not a traditional academic setting that's talking about education systems. And I think this graphic is a nice reminder. As educators, we need to be mindful of the fact that students will need to be acquiring information and foundational skills, particularly going into a professional career, but that those need to be coexisting with the skills, development, competencies, and the character qualities. So the challenge for us as educators is we can't just add more information. We can't, increase our class time by 2 or 3-fold. But that means needing to change what we're doing in the classroom, how we augment that, potentially through technology, through online learning resources, or just reform what we're doing in classrooms so those foundational literacies are sitting side by side through exercises along with these other things. And that, to me, that's the challenge of our day, kind of going forward. In terms of how we go about delivering these 4 C's, and these sort of character qualities, I think we can only do this, we all recognize, by using active forms of learning like experiential learning is defined here, which is really learning by doing, but also not just doing things, but also creating time within those learning events to get students to reflect. Just by doing, just by learning to swim, by jumping in the pool, if you don't have time to think, well, that didn't work so well, it's not that reflection time. Really isn't time to improve. So that's really an important principle. In experiential learning, we get excited in many institutions about experiential learning, but we have to remember that we and hundreds of colleagues, thousands, tens of thousands of colleagues across the country have been doing experiential learning in different forms for a long time. And it's going to manifest a little bit differently depending on the subject of the course, the nature of the academic program that's there. So we're not creating something that's new, but we're really focusing, I think, certainly within the University of Calgary, on the importance of experiential learning, and I'll talk more about how we go about doing that. Of course, when you're doing experiential learning and having students be active participants rather than just passive consumers of lectures or watching videos, the responsibility shifts. It's not that it's taken away from the instructor, but the role of the instructor becomes something different. Instead of being the focus on the instructor being at the front of the room, students are more involved. So this idea of collaboration, students and instructors working together. And in the most extreme version, probably when students have become proficient in acquiring information, validating information, and working within teams through collaboration, really the role of the instructor is to be at the side of the classroom and observing and moving things forward. And I love that concept, and we talk a lot about it within the Taylor Institute at the University of Calgary, students as collaborators in learning rather than recipients or clients.
So Jay, before you proceed, there's a
Yep.
question for you,
Yep.
and there's an audience member who's asking, the 21st century skills that you talked about, are they as relevant for higher ed as they are for K-12? Because this person's been trying to find resources to figure out ways to implement it in the higher ed scenario, but hasn't really found much.
I think it is relevant all along the continuum, really. And ideally, what you've got is students that are already well-versed and practiced in some of these 4C skills and character quality development that are coming into post-secondary.
Mm-hmm.
And so the challenge becomes, are we actually able to adapt quick enough if there's a stream of students coming in? There's some really fantastic experiential learning things going on in K-12 sectors, and I've been involved in something I'll talk about in a few minutes. And the question is often asked to me, is the University of Calgary or universities ready for that? Or where could my son, daughter, or where could I go to have a similar experience that what they had this? And so we encounter those students in our classrooms all the time.
So perhaps in terms of resources, they can write to you and ask you for some guidance on how to implement
I think in terms of resources, and it's something intentionally we're trying to do within the Taylor Institute, is build, not just put on courses which involve active experiential learning, but actually do research and scholarship. It's part of our job is to disseminate that, not just the University of Calgary, but to the broader community.
Yeah, and some of the information you will share sort of deconstructs that a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So just moving on, this graphic is just sort of a reminder of the different forms of experiential learning that already exist. This is really focusing on post-secondary, from the professional sorts of programs like medicine or engineering or practicums or internships are deeply embedded. So while you're learning to be a doctor, it's not good enough just to learn it in the classroom. You actually need to be working with real-life patients under the supervision of people who are trained professionals that are certified. And of course, that makes the experience real life. But it also, as I'll keep touching upon, it also creates this great motivation for students because it's not a theoretical, it's not a simulation. These are real patients or real connections with community. And so these are the many, many different forms of experiential learning that happen. This is also a reminder that as impactful as experiential learning can be, it takes additional resources. And we recognize this, and many colleagues who do this have shifted what happens in their classrooms to doing experiential learning, be that doing sort of field trips or bringing people from the outside or connecting with the community. You're not just there as the fountain of knowledge at the front of the room teaching the class. You are scheduling, everything from scheduling buses to bringing in experts, and so your role really changes. And so we, as administration, need to think about how do we, if experiential learning is important, how do we resource that? What does the model look like going forward?
And not all the answers have been found, but we're in the process of making that shift and finding the answers.
That's right. Okay. Another term you see kind of emerging more beyond experiential learning is a sort of a specific type of experiential learning called authentic learning, this is sort of my synthesis definition of what's out in the literature there. It's a type of experiential learning that involves students exploring, discussing, constructing issues in real world context, but also connecting with audiences who are the recipients of their learning. So it's not just the experience, and then the students go back and reflect and write an essay that only their professor reads, that their audience for what they're producing is that community as well. And so those are two critical elements. So this is a summary of some work that's published and available online. What are the four major themes supporting authentic learning? And the first one is what I talked about. So focus of students on real world problems, but that the audiences are beyond the classroom, beyond the professor. And what this does is it becomes real world, and students appreciate that. But unwittingly, what happens is that the students get this extra sort of motivation to learn because they're interacting with real people in the community, focusing on real issues for them. And they get quite jazzed at the idea that their reporting back of their learning is being heard or read by people in the real life community. It creates a motivation that you just can't replicate in the classroom. The second important element is that it involves open-ended inquiry. It's development of those thinking skills that Leslie talked about. Third critical element is, by and large, that students are doing this learning in the context of a community within the classroom and also connecting more broadly in the community. And that, again, creates a different kind of motivation, the peer-to-peer. And through that, they're developing the knowledge of what it means to be working within a team. Not just what it means to lead a team, but what it means to be a team member where you're holding the leader as much as yourself accountable for that. And so I think that's important work. And by and large, this is done in the form of project work, but even in the broad topic of a specific course, giving some room for students to choose an area of their own inquiry and innovation that's of interest to them, allowing them to explore, but they're coming back to a community and situating their own specific knowledge development in a broader context. So to me, those are the four critical elements that are really important.
So there's a couple of related questions that have come in that I'll ask, and I think they're for both of you, Leslie and Jay. But before that, what I did want to say was, for decades, the focus has been so much on leadership, but you brought up a really interesting point about followership. It's as important to understand how to be a good follower in a collaborative situation as it is being a leader. So that's really cool. So the questions are, what is inquiry-based learning? And the second is, the whole thing around, let me just read it, social emotional learning. How does that, social emotional learning, how does that get embedded in a higher education curriculum? How do you make sure that it gets delivered at the right time to the right needs?
Oh, that is such a good question because it is so hard. I have some colleagues who are exploring how do I embed that in courses that I teach? And do I know enough about that to embed it in a thoughtful way and assess it? But I can give you an example. A colleague of mine, before doing a group project, so students in her class do group work, is, she'll have them do some reflection on how they are, where they think their collaborative skills are at, where they think they need to grow. So it's starting to get students to think about, there's the outcome we need to produce, but then there's how we're going to do that in a team and how getting students to think about how socially and emotionally aware are they. I've had my own experience with that too, where we're started to explore with students group work and get students to think about, what does a high-functioning team look like? What does a high-performance team look like? And you'll see, students describe, oh, I hate group work because I'm always the one that has to do all of the work. And then when you watch them in a group, you realize, gosh, that person actually really doesn't have good social and emotional awareness, that they are interrupting people all the time and taking over the group work. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I know colleagues of mine are thinking deeply about how do you embed that? And to get back to Jay's point, it's not just an add-on to the curriculum. Like we're thinking now about students becoming aware of how they are socially and emotionally in a way that's thoughtful, reflective, and isn't an add-on to what is an already busy, you know, curriculum. Yeah.
And what it also brings up is the need to constantly equip our educators to be able to deliver these, you know, or bring that into their teaching. And that's where the Taylor Institute is really a very significant development for us at the University of Calgary, which really is about the network of educators and how are we, over and above subject matter expertise, how are we integrating all of these other elements into the delivery of our curriculum.
Yeah, and what does that mean for what our colleagues need who are teaching in this way and designing learning experiences in this way? Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and what about inquiry-based?
So inquiry-based learning is simply a form of learning in which students are assigned a topic to learn about, but they drive the bus with respect to finding information to build their knowledge base. So they're utilizing or having to utilize skills of where to find information, what are credible sources of information, and also whether it's in the form of the old days in an encyclopedia book or now online or in talking with people. An important aspect is understanding the validity of the information, but what is the perspective that shapes how that information was put together and communicated. And so I think a really important part, and it connects with the social emotional learning aspect, is to get students through their inquiry to not just understand one perspective, but when they become interested in one area, to think about that from a few different perspectives. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and they think, well, why? I know what my perspective is. They may know what their perspective is, but not necessarily the foundations of that. Where does that come from? Does it come from their culture, their history, their experience, their friends? But when you force them to consider a topic from a different perspective, then their minds really open up and their appetites to learn and to actually listen to other members of a team, particularly when things get tough. So in my experience, we do that by situating it, okay, you're going to do this work in the context of a group, and you're going to do this through inquiry, and you're going to have to choose a common area of interest. And then the squirming begins, and maybe some will be trying to dominate the group. But if you just kind of let that play out and then pause and say, how did that work? So rather than giving them a workshop and here's what a well-functioning team is, you know, you can give them a bit of language, but really get them involved in the experience, and then their minds open up. Say, could we do this better? That group seems to be working well. This person doesn't seem to be fussed by one other person dominating the situation. So building in time again to reflect, and it's not an add-on, it's intentionally built into practice. Students may not know that at the beginning, but they realize it in the middle and the end.
Yeah, and for those in our audience that may be interested in building student teams that excel, we did have a webinar on that last week, so it's available on demand. Please do consume it. Yeah, so with that, thank you for the answers.
Yeah, so this is just a bit of an introduction to the College of Discovery, Creativity, and Innovation, which is a unit within the Taylor Institute of Teaching and Learning here at the University of Calgary. And so we talked about experiential learning and authentic learning, and really what the purpose of the college is defined there is to create some educational experiences that enable interdisciplinary, critical, system-level thinking and innovation, but to share that experience more broadly with the community and to actually benefit from that. Instructors we've got involved in our course offerings are already well-versed in this. And some people want to learn more about it. Some people want to come and be in a team of instructors where we've got somebody from business and engineering and from fine arts all working together. So there's a huge appetite. So it's almost like we're the laboratory to put on some things, learn from it, and disseminate that and share that with the campus community. And so with that in mind, it's an opportunity to learn more about signature pedagogies like inquiry or project-based learning, and do that at the course level, but also to imagine things at a program level. We haven't put a lot of effort into that, but Leslie gave this overview. The world has really changed with who's shaping education, the private sector, partnerships between the private sector and academic institutions are going to do that. Students are learning more through their devices than ever before. So it forces us to, reimagine potentially what a degree looks like and what are the credentials that are meaningful, still meaningful today. Because just sitting in a classroom, we've recognized for a long time, just sitting in a classroom for 4 years is no longer good enough. So the college was conceived of and put into the academic plan of the university in 2012, and it went live in just over a year ago with launching some of our initial program offerings. And so the first program offering that we launched was an introductory first-year course called Global Challenges. The prefix of the course is UNAV 201. You can go online and learn a little bit about the course. And the idea is that it's open to any first-year university student from whatever program they come from. So if there's room within their timetable to come to this course, so we've got engineering students and business students and nursing students and fine arts students, language studies students working together. And the idea is that every few years we'll define a global challenge. And so there aren't that many of them. Sort of it's going to be about the environment, it's going to be about energy. And what we focused on initially was the challenge of feeding 9 billion people by the year 2050. That's a projected population growth. So this is all inquiry and project-based learning. So day one, these students can talk about food, where it comes from, and the nature of the challenge of feeding another 2 billion people on the planet. That's a nice thing. We don't need to sit them down and explain food systems. They can start talking about food right away. And they do this in the context of inquiry, learning about the elements. So there's poverty. There's food technology discussions. There's the notion of food waste that comes up. There's social, scientific, engineering, all mixed together, and that's the point. And students working in groups have the freedom to explore the areas that are interested in them, but then they report back to each other. On the slide there is just an indication of some of the innovation project areas, but they really do touch on cut across disciplines. I've got a word cloud there from everything from policy to human development to technology, et cetera. And it's beautiful to watch these first-year students just seamlessly walk across that. I'm often asked the question, could you do that with a fourth-year student that's, they're working in their program area? Maybe not. We're taking students that are still relatively undifferentiated compared to what happens kind of going forward.
So there's a related question when you go to this word cloud that has come in, which is how do you evaluate this type of learning? And that actually throws up a much bigger question around evaluations and how, the sets sort of quizzes and tests and stuff that we do. They probably don't capture learning in this area. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in the context of the courses that we rolled out, we're evaluating them not on their knowledge, but rather on their inquiry work and their group work to develop an innovation. And so we assess that through an online portfolio, electronic portfolio. So all students, right from day one in class, begin working and adding artifacts and impressions to an electronic portfolio, which is reflective of their own personal learning. They're required to write a few reflective statements, one at the beginning of the course, what is the nature of the challenge, and how have they grown over the course. And these are quite powerful documents that come out. And they're also given the freedom to populate their electronic portfolio in a variety of ways. It could be in the form of a video, it could be in the form of just written things. And then also in this type of learning, showing up and actively participating is a key part. So participation is often rewarded. This is really fundamental importance for these courses. In these courses, I didn't say at the beginning, we set them at a maximum of 30 students per section. So it's noticeable when a student is not there. And so we try to build into the culture that if a student is not able to come, that's okay. But it's something they negotiate, not just with the instructor, but also the team that they're working with. And they recognize. I mean, students are busy. There's a variety of reasons, other experiences that may be.
So that's great. Thank you, Jay. So that is pertaining to this particular course that you're doing. But, from a systemic level, I wonder, Leslie, if you have some thoughts to share on how do we equip your systems to make that shift?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the fundamental shift is we need to value assessing the process of learning as much as the product of learning. And so, and that is really, really tricky. It is tough, and that's where, getting back to Jay, how are we providing the resources and support for folks so they can build rubrics, assignments, assessments, activities, where the process of how a student, was given a task and how they went about that task and reflect back on that becomes the things we are looking at in terms of how we're assessing learning, which is as important as the product that is maybe traditionally is the way we would have assessed, the final report.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's a fundamental shift in how we design classroom and learning experiences or course and learning experiences, how we support the academic staff and graduate students that teach in those courses, and even just how we schedule classes. Like, all of that is being disrupted by this shift toward process being as important as product.
Yeah. And to have folks like yourselves that are focusing entirely on how we make that shift is really great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that, that's a really beautiful segue, unintentional, but a beautiful segue to the notion of, as much as we get excited about the idea of students working across disciplines and areas to kind of come together around a global challenge, universities have evolved over centuries as what I call a confederation of specialties, right? So it wasn't just you went to university and every student took philosophy and science, but rather now you go into faculties, and even within faculties you go to a specific department. Or in some areas, you don't just take biology, which subtype of biology you take, which subtype of engineering. And the consequence of some of that is that barriers come up. And these are some street signs that I love. I photograph interesting street signs from around the world. But what it means is we build in the notion of prerequisites. So if you want to take that course in advanced design, you can only get that if you've done these prerequisites. So authorized personnel. And then also, when we build in prerequisites like that, we put the value around specialization, it means we, in effect, create barriers for students to take courses across different disciplines. Or if they want to get a secondary of focus, then it's like, okay, well, you can do that, but it's going to take an extra year or two to do that. So just as Leslie said, the challenges around this type of learning in terms of scheduling and how we do it, how we assess it, this is looking at a program model. If this type of learning is important, working across disciplines, how do we do that in the context of still being able to train people who maybe first and foremost want to be experts, want to be an engineer, but they also want these additional skills and knowledge as well. So it really focuses challenges in such a program model. An important element of these courses, and I think in general, the importance of authentic learning, is situating students in the real public space. So here's an example of a few events that we launched for our Global Challenge students. One was a dinner aimed at feeding 9 billion people. Dinner. 200 people, about half from the Calgary community, Southern Alberta community, came, and students were in charge of driving the conversation at dinner tables of about 8 to 10 people. So students were representing their knowledge, but their inquiries and having conversations with farmers, restaurateurs, people who worked with NGOs dealing with people with poverty. And the Speakeasy is another type of public event where we get together and have broader conversations, students, people from the community, faculty, staff, to have conversations that are topics important for creativity and innovation kind of more broadly. And so we launched this we had a discussion about failing successfully. So that was touched on earlier, the importance of building in failure and reflection from failure as a growth mindset opportunity. And we've actually got an event coming up in January 25th. And so people can go online or interested. It's open to the public. Anybody can come. We ask you to register. But we're situating students together with faculty and staff in an informal basis. And people walk away and say, I learned a lot that night. And yet it's not a formal register for a course, be assessed through a test, but these are great learning opportunities. I want to highlight another example of something that I was involved with, not in the context of the college, really. Did involve some people in the university But it was asking the question, it gets back to the earlier question about how early education do we want to be shaping these 4 C skills or character qualities. And this was a program based on the idea of asking high school students about the grade 10, 11 area before our system forces them to start choosing elective courses they're going to take in order to make the transition into university or colleges. And just asking students the questions, what's the world going to look like in the year 2050? And to come up with an innovation idea. What was interesting about this was seeing how different schools that were involved in this interpreted that and how they connected with curriculum. So this was by and large an extracurricular student club thing, but how they then connected that with social studies class, science class, language arts class. And in each of the 4 participating schools in our pilot, it took on a life of its own. And the really exciting thing was when we took students that were working on their innovation ideas for several months, we brought them together at a summit to present their ideas and learn from each other. An important thing from the Global Challenge course experience, but also this high school thing, is that the process of developing innovation, going through this cycle of discovery, creativity, and innovation, you get tremendous amount of learning, and if it's an authentic experience, the students are excited about that. But that their pitch, their presentation, is an opportunity for learning if you build in time for reflection and refinement. And that's what happens gloriously. So really what's happening at a detailed sort of cognitive level through the cycle of discover, create, innovate is development of all of these sort of foundational skills. But students are inherently motivated because they're working on something that's of interest to them. And they maybe don't realize it, but in the context of situating it as group work, they're learning to collaborate. They're getting feedback from the community, and that just creates a motivation to continue to learn.
So there's a question, Jay, about these models that you have been talking about, and how they might make some educators feel vulnerable because they're not equipped to be in a situation where they're not the expert. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do we equip them?
Maybe I'm going to touch on that at the end, maybe because this type of learning I found is meaningful not just for students but also quite profoundly for instructors as well. Because you say it changes the model from being the expert about food systems or energy systems or whatever to rather being the expert that helps guide students through the process of inquiry, the creative process, their ability to reflect. So it changes. So really what we're doing back there is what students are doing is developing these different critical design thinking, numeracy, growth mindset, thinking skills. And know really as a collective really define what the University of Calgary are using as this entrepreneurial thinking. Not that we're training entrepreneurs, but in the ways that entrepreneurs look at problems, think at the system level, critical, and come up with something, which, as Leslie said, is sort of foundational to the University of Calgary strategy going forward. And she's touched on that already, but this is just a reminder of what we're doing is intentionally getting students through the process of inquiry. Every student that is involved in these courses is involved in research. We're using a different form of approach to teaching and learning. By connecting students with the community, we're fulfilling that connection and really changing the student experience. So just finally, this type of learning, I've really sort of focused on it from the student perspective. What we've seen is, and this the literature says, the student engagement goes significantly up in authentic learning experiences, but also the impact that it has on instructors, not just at the challenge of changing their role from being the expert to rather the guide of inquiry and creativity and innovation. But what I've seen quite profoundly, and this is part of the research that we're doing around these course experiences, is looking at the impact that has on instructors. But anecdotally, we hear comments from instructors saying it's reaffirmed why I wanted to be a teacher in the first place. I now am more comfortable in being in this really uncomfortable place of learning. It's different than just being at the front of the room and lecturing for 50 minutes and having the students kind of go away. And it's an opportunity for instructors to be part of a broader community when we bring them together to what we call communities of practice. So I've just touched on a few things that we're doing. There's more information on the Taylor Institute website. That's one of the web links I think we've got as a resource that's up there. And certainly make connections with us if you want to learn more or get involved.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. There are a few other questions. One that came in for Leslie, asking if there will be exams in the world of the new SMART. I wonder if it's one of those people that identified themselves as students in our survey, in a poll earlier.
You know, I think balance is important for everything. I think there's still a time for exams, but there's lots of time, I think, when we have historically used exams as final assessment, where something may be more authentic, to use the word that Jay's talked about a lot, authentic to what we were asking students to learn is important. So, you know, for example, learning portfolios, getting a student to reflect back on, I started here at the beginning of the course, you know, I have benchmarks of how I learned, how that landed for me over time, and getting a student to reflect on that and hand that in instead of a final exam is, you know, really depends on the context, but I think moving away from the traditional forms of assessment will be an important piece of making sure that these skills and ways of knowing and ways of being in the world become a part of what happens here when a student does a degree.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we clearly have a strategy and a plan around how we are making the shift, you know, with the information that both of you shared. What would be your final thoughts on any institution that is looking to make that shift or in the midst of the shift? What would be some of the things to think about?
So I'll start and then hand it off to Leslie. I think one important thing is, and I said it a long way in my presentation, is that experiential learning, even authentic forms of learning, already exist in the K-12 sector within universities and colleges. The level of awareness as to how much exists in an institution may not be all that high, but it exists already. And so putting resources into finding out what's going on, to bring people together, to share experiences. And then another important critical part of the strategy, and I'd not say we've got it right here at the University of Calgary, the critical thing is experiential learning, authentic forms of learning, does take additional kinds of resources and expertise. And so intentionally thinking about that, not just saying that it's important or we've got it or we want to grow it, but thinking about how we do it differently in terms of resources is an important part. I can't imagine there's any institution out there that would be starting from zero in this space.
Yeah, I always love to say, think big, start small. And so it's, you know, starting with those pockets of where this is happening already in the campus community, finding out what's working, finding out what's getting in the way for students and educators who are moving to teaching and learning in this way and responding to, you know, this changing, uncertain world. Find those pockets, find out what they need, and start to network those pockets. I think that's one of the first and most important things to do is connect folks across your campus community, especially at a big school like ours. I mean, you know, occasionally we'll have a meeting about something and someone from one side of campus, you know, physically and metaphorically meets up with someone from another side of campus, and all of a sudden they realize they're doing the same thing and they can learn from each other. And so it's, yeah, I think starting with what's already happening and go from there.
Yeah, and so creating those communities of practice, the sharing, and then developing from there.
Yeah.
And then there is a final question from the audience about being very explicit about, so ultimately, how do these types of learning prepare students for the unknown?
Yeah. So, I mean, being prepared for the unknown to me means that the growth mindset skills are there. It means that, okay, all of a sudden I'm doing something I was never expected to do, or I never expected myself to do. It's not what I was, quote unquote, formally trained to do. I can figure this out. I can break down the skills I need, the knowledge I need, the expertise I need. I know how to learn and respond to something I wasn't expecting. Those skills of the humility, the new SMART, the skills of growth mindset, to me, prepare someone. I know they've prepared me when I've looked back to be able to maybe not know exactly how something's going to play out, but I know where to start. I know who to ask. I know how to help seek. I know how to get feedback on my progress. And if our students can graduate with the skills and knowledge of their discipline and the skills and knowledge of growth mindset and being aware of their thinking and the quality of their thinking and awareness of self and others, boy, our students will change the world in profound ways.
Yeah, and subject matter expertise is really important,
yes.
but it's not really about having answers to everything. It's about being able to ask the right questions to find the answers that you're looking for. Okay, great. And Jay, would you like to add anything?
I'll just add to that the notion we're talking about these as in terms of skills, and like any skill, be it swimming or attendance serve or public speaking, practice makes better, or practice makes perfect. And so getting students comfortable right from no matter what education sphere that you're in, the K-12 sector or university setting, that practiced assessment of students thinking about issues for which there is not one simple solution, being comfortable in that muddy space, but being brave enough to represent their learning through inquiry, to work as in a collaborative team, to get feedback on their ideas, even if they weren't great ideas. Be brave enough to do that, practice that again and again, then I think we're preparing students for the future.
Okay, thank you. But before we close, we're very close to closing, I just wanted to remind everyone to fill out the survey. Also do sign up for our webinars. There are some that are upcoming, which I'll share with you in a minute. But also there is a whole repository of recorded webinars that you can sign up for and continue as you are interested. We also have videos and other types of and ebooks. You can go to ucalgary.ca/explore/collections to get these. We do have a webinar coming up later this week. It is on technology and gaming in education, another really interesting topic. Like as we talk a little bit about the connection of education with technology and the digital world, so we'll be covering some of that. And if you have ideas on topics that we should be using for our upcoming webinars, please do email us at exploreucalgary@ucalgary.ca. So with that, I would like to thank both of us speakers, Leslie and Jay. Thank you for sharing your information and your thoughts with us. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.